Hi everybody, bon dia Yves, Cordia. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is Fireside 26 and Banachti Lo Eile Sheila Jiv, that is Happy Sheila's Day. So you may wonder, who was Sheila? Allegedly she was St. Patrick's sister or his wife, and up to the famine times she was honoured here in Ireland, and then she disappeared after the famine. But many people, or what would we say, the largest Irish population outside of the island of Ireland is in Nova Scotia, and they took Sheila with them, and she's been honoured there. So Happy Sheila's Day to everybody. Let me know, Keith from Vancouver, hi Ellie from Kent, somebody from Carmarthen, hi Pat from Ulster, lovely, Dean from Bedfordshire, Catherine, Tara from New York, welcome. Linda from Maryland, wonderful. And from France and Bordeaux, I still can never pronounce your name. Lisa from Washington, lovely to see you. Ava from Belgium, welcome back. Salutations from Maine, lovely. And Pauline from Lancashire. Well, it's lovely to see you all here, and I would like to introduce you to this week's guest, is Jonathan Wooley. Jonathan, you're so welcome.
Oh, thank you, Eimear. It's so wonderful to be here, and noswaith to everybody here on the call today. So
let me know that you can hear him speaking. So let us know if the sound is okay or not okay. That would be great. So anyway, Jonathan, you're very, very welcome. So I always ask this question about people's landscape. So where are you?
Where am I? So I am actually in a rather cool and historic place for Druidry right now. So I live in London. I'm born and raised in sort of.
Sorry, hold on a second. They're saying I'm going to have to up the volume.
Up the volume. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. This is it's great to have sound checkers in the audience. So can you speak now?
Yes, I can. How does that sound, everybody? Is that okay?
You're not much louder. Can you up yours? Wait, let me see. Let me.
How's that?
I think that might be better. How is it sound as good? Can you up it a bit more? Somebody says it's good. I know. Fine for me. It tends to be mixed. Some people hear it better than others, depending where they are. So anyway, start. You're in this wonderful place.
Yes. So I live in London. I was born and raised in the Chiltern Hills, which are actually not very far away to the west of here. But I moved into London for work, to be with friends, and I'm actually living in St John's Wood, which is literally like 2 minutes walk away from Primrose Hill.
Oh.
Which is obviously a very sort of historic place in the history of Druidry. It's where Iona Morganwg held the sort of first Gorseth there, and sort of like really kicks off the kind of Druid revival. And it's obviously a very beloved place of William Blake. I go walking there every day, and it's a really wonderful, beautiful spot. So I've only just moved here, so it feels very timely and auspicious to be sort of moving here, and then literally a couple of weeks later being on a fireside chat with you, Emma.
Oh, wonderful! And of course, Ross Nichols had the early OBOD ceremonies were on Primrose Hill as well.
Indeed.
I've never been there. What's it like?
So it's part of sort of this sort of wider area of parks in this part of London. So it's very, very central. So it's literally a sort of a stone's throw away from from Oxford Street and Soho, which are like, for people who don't know, who've not visited London, they're kind of like the sort of the real sort of hub for, like, you know, tourists mainly, actually, although not right now. But it's sort of on the western side of the city, and Primrose Hill is just north of Regent's Park, which is this very large sort of manicured area of parkland that was sort of set up by well, I can never remember which George it was, but but it was set up by one of the former sort of monarchs of the UK, and but Primrose Hill itself, to be honest, I feel it has an atmosphere very similar to Glastonbury Tor, and I can really see why Ross and Yolo and all of these other sort of Druidic leaders were drawn there, because it's this sort of hill that kind of rises from a relatively flat sort of, because London's a river valley, so it's largely flat, has a really commanding view. And there's sort of various, so it's a bit like parkland, really, sort of trees dotted here and there, some native species, some things like London plane, which are not which are also recent kind of like cultivars, I guess. But it's got a really lovely atmosphere. It's very, very busy at the moment, obviously because of the pandemic. Going to the park is really the only thing that you can really do with the current restrictions. So you've just got, yeah, unfortunately, it's not looking at its best, because there's been a lot of people sort of going off onto the grass on either side of the paths to kind of avoid each other, and they've obviously worn away the grass. And so I think it's going to have a couple of months to recover when people have when everyone's vaccinated and we've reached herd immunity.
Absolutely. So I remember I don't know if I was talking to Ricky Gellison a few weeks back, and he talked about, because he lives in, what is it, south of London and north of Kent. It was almost like, it depends on which way you're looking.
Yeah.
He says in his grove, they don't have one place to go to. They go all around London. Is your favorite place Primrose Hill, or are there other places in London that you like to go to?
Well, it's funny. So there are lots of lovely places to go in London. So I've had some really wonderful experiences actually in Mile End Cemetery, which is this. So there are a lot of former cemeteries in London which have been converted into parks, because obviously, it's a very old city. The old graveyards fill up. And they sort of and then there's no more room to sort of bury anyone, and so it's at capacity, and it's then just converted into green space. And the no, the headstones are still there, so it's just a, so you can go. So another one is Highgate Cemetery, which is very similar. So it's where Marx, for example, is buried, and people regularly walk and
Karl Marx, not Groucho.
Not Groucho, no. So Karl Marx is very there.
I think he was in London.
Yeah, no. So there's a lot of these sort of special places tucked away. There's also some other really wonderful ones. There's a Crossbones Cemetery, which is a place on the south bank of the Thames, which was sort of actually a graveyard for prostitutes, actually, and for other women who were sort of rejected by society, and it's been converted into a really beautiful kind of actually really spiritual place where the memories of those women are honoured. And one of the things I always do find a bit of a shame in London, though, is that it's actually quite difficult to find somewhere. Crossbones is one of the few places actually where genuinely you can get some peace and quiet, and where people acknowledge that it's a kind of a spiritual place. Obviously you have churches and you have synagogues and mosques, but in terms of open spaces where Druids would want to practice, wherever you go, you're going to get people coming to you with, there's going to be people playing loud music or having picnics or, playing football or whatever. I sometimes get people coming up and bothering me and trying to sell me drugs and stuff, because they see you sitting there kind of like with your eyes closed, and they're like, oh, he must be on something. No, I'm not. I'm just praying. It's so it kind of, I think a lot of people find it a bit weird, or at least just not something they're used to in parks. But there are some lovely places you can go to practice. Another one is Highgate Woods. Actually, Highgate Woods is really very special.
Yeah, funny. There are people coming ahead of you mentioning that. Kate Fulcher, Crossbones Cemetery, Catherine Farnley, Highgate's Wood is lovely too. It's really interesting. I'm really intrigued with this notion of Crossbones Cemetery, a place where prostitutes were buried. But honoring women who stepped out of society.
Yeah.
And it being one of the most spiritual of the former graveyards. And it just struck me, when we visit the ancient cairns, which would have been some kind of burial, either putting in the cremated bones afterwards, or we're not so sure, and how they've been still regarded as sacred places, honoring the ancestors. And I think it's just beautiful whenever I get to London again, if I do, to go to Crossbones Cemetery. I'm really intrigued with this. We've had a history of Magdalen laundries and huge women's abuse, and we've had the latest scandal of a mother and baby report that didn't acknowledge the women's stories. So it's lovely to think that there's that cemetery that's there honoring those women and women who stepped out of society. I like that notion.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's so important, and it's particularly important, now we're in a where violence against women is lamentably ubiquitous. There was a recent study that came out with sort of 97% of women in the UK who were surveyed have some experience of abuse and harassment, which is just a horrendous figure. And the fact that women are so vulnerable and so and persecuted by society means that places like Crossbones are just so important. And I think we need more places like them.
Absolutely. Yeah, anyway, there's little things going off in my head, because we have, cemeteries from these laundries where women who weren't prostitutes, actually, women who were in the Magdalen laundries, they weren't prostitutes. They were women who got pregnant for various reasons and were just wiped out. Kate Fulcher says they tie ribbons with the names of each of the Scarlet women on the gates, so they're never forgotten. Thanks, Kate. You must be a Londoner too. That's just lovely. I like that idea. And then Kate has asked you a question. Have you been to Epping Forest?
I've never actually got to Epping Forest, which is such a shame. I really want to go there. I don't think we're allowed at the moment because it's traveling for like a non-work or non-vital reason. But it's right at the top of my list of places to go, and it's really easy because you just like hop on the Central Line and it's just right up there. So it wouldn't take long to get there at all from here.
Okay, so that's the to-do list.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are there any other places that people would recommend to me? Because I'm always on the lookout for new kind of like little sanctuaries and places to go to in London.
Well, Ricky Gellison now, funny, each time we talk about someone else that comes up in the feed. Okay, is it Tamisa's seed group will use Highgate Woods, Richmond Park, Green Park, Crystal Palace Park, Primrose Hill, and they rotate them. So
yeah. I do. One thing I did think about Primrose Hill actually, and because I know that a number of different Druid groups use it, and that's something I'm very curious about. And I've actually wanted to ask Ricky this, or Ferdiad, or anyone else in the Tamas's seed group actually about because I started going literally to Tamas's events like just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic come in and they've all been obviously cancelled because of the because of all the restrictions. And so I feel like my sort of opportunity to kind of spend time with Tamasys has kind of was sort of brought was
frustrated.
very frustrating. But yeah, so I really I definitely want to find out more about who uses Primrose Hill and what times, and if it's a bit like Stonehenge where there's like a rota, OBOD gets it for this slot and then the AOD gets it for this slot, and it's all very sort of politely organized. It's just something I was curious about. I was actually thinking about it today. But yeah.
Zane Cooper, and Zane is in the US, he said, how does moving to a new location change your Druidry? I assume, Zane, you mean, having a different site each time. But I think maybe many groves and seed groups do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's actually, so I think this is actually quite a big difference between because I've done field, so I'm you know, for my sins, I'm in addition to being a practicing druid, I'm a social scientist. I'm an anthropologist of paganism and how people relate to the environment. And I've done field work with British druids, but also with pagans in the US, albeit quite a short stint of field work. And when I have been in that sort of capacity, I found that a lot of pagans in the US have land and will have like or will have acquired like a permanent space that they tend to kind of use very frequently. Not always, but in many cases that's very common. Whereas in the UK, that's much less frequent, and people will have a relationship with specific places often, but they will not be the owners of those places. So as a result, it's and because other people own them, it's much more. It's likely that you won't necessarily be able to use it at the times you want to, or it won't work out because it's busy then or whatever. So it's much more common, I think, for British groups to kind of rotate to different sites. You know, so and I think that is, in some ways, I think that's a shame, because I think it's quite nice to be able to have like a permanent home and to be able to build a kind of relationship on that level. But you can do that particularly if you do what Tamasys does and you kind of rotate to the same places, then you can build a relationship with them. It's just obviously a bit less it's a bit less as focused, I suppose, as it would be if you've literally just got one place and you do all of your druidry there, and that's your kind of your locus.
It's interesting because all my ceremonies are here in my grove, and they've been going on since 2003. And there's something around being in the one place, because then you're really aware of the seasons as they change, because you see the landscape, how it changes, and also the energy increases. You know, the more you're in, you have ritual in a space. I think the higher it gets. I mean, I'm always worried about using vibrations and things like that, because. But
you end up, yeah, like summoning some irate physicist who's like sort of like,
that's right. Yes.
That's not what energy means, you know, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And Gabriella says that's a very interesting point, how ownership of land influences the relationship with the landscape. And it's essentially, okay, this is my land, I own it legally, but I belong to it. It doesn't belong to me. I have that strong sense that really there as a steward of the land. And I know Ben Hopkinson from Australia, he will walk the wheel and the spiral out of Sydney to the greater Sydney areas that resonate with each of the festivals. And that was something that was occurring to me, that when you take, we say, Stonehenge, for example, you know, it's aligned to the two solstices. We have sacred sites. Newgrange is the winter solstice, but you have Loch Crew to the equinox. And there are various sites around Ireland that are aligned to the various solar points. And I think that's really, really interesting. So I think there's something in all of that to be able to move around.
Definitely.
My task is to stay here and generate the energy here. So I don't go to other places. So, okay, Zayn, I hope that answered your question. So what is it? Linda Steele, I've had my very small patch in Maryland for over 30 years. My son's ash tree is still growing there. Oh, since he's passed. I think that's lovely that's really touching, Linda, to, you know, you have a tree that goes on living. I know my daughter was born in this room that I'm in now, and we planted a yew tree the day after she was born and buried the placenta in the roots, and it's still there. It's much taller than she is now, but that's 19 years ago. But it's lovely to plant trees like that and to have that continuity in a place and that sense of connection with the spirit of the place. So I think all of those ways of practicing Druidry is valid. You know, it just depends on what your purpose is or your task is. Like Ellie says, there are places I would love to practice regularly, but many others want to use the sites also, and it's down to sharing, you know. So there's absolutely, yeah. So do you remember your first spiritual experience, or what's the first one that you can remember?
Oh, that's such a good question. So you know, I mean, I've always resonated with that, you know, sort of almost like kind of universal observation that a lot of Druids and pagans make, which is that they've always practiced in some way. They didn't really know what they were doing when they were 5 or whatever, but they've always but that's certainly true for me. So because I remember being very small in my parents' back garden, and like literally with a bucket that, from being a small person, even though it's only like this big, was like my size, and like putting herbs in it, and then mud, and then paint, and then stirring it really, really fast, and doing kind of magic as in that way. But I also have this really weird early memory, uh, and I don't know if this is, and I don't put a huge amount of stock in it, but I only thought about, but it always sticks out for me from when I was very small. I was about 3, and I can remember wanting to be a bird. I don't know, maybe not 3, but certainly very young, and I wanted to be a bird. I was desperate to be a bird, and so what I did is I kept jumping and flapping my arms really hard, and I remember doing that. And then one time I did that, and I have this really vivid memory of just very slowly coming back down to the ground. And what is funny about it is that I remember at various ages as I got older, still as a child, looking back and thinking, "Oh, that was weird." Like, And I remember when I first did it, and I thought, "Oh, well, there you go then." I obviously flapped my arms hard enough, and then I went off and did something else, like to play with blocks or to kind of play with dinosaurs or something. But yeah, it's like I remember many, many times as I got older, I looked back and thought, "That's really weird. Did that actually happen? Did I dream it? What was that?" So it's just this very, and I often think of that now. I view that through a somewhat kind of, because I think that resonates with a lot of what would become my spirituality. This sort of wanting to connect with the world, and through these slightly ritualistic kind of playful activities. Because I was always convinced that the world was full of dragons and fairies. I knew that imagination was real. And in fact, it kind of got me really. I remember being 10 and falling into this really, really big depression, because I was like, I'm feeling so desolate because everyone was telling me, "Oh, you've got to put away all that imaginary stuff now. It doesn't exist." And I'm like, "Well, but you know, it must, I feel it's kind of, there's a realness to it. Like I can't deny that." So I got really miserable, because I was like, "Oh gosh, the world is just all this kind of mundane stuff." And I remember thinking this very vividly. Well, I guess I'll just become a Christian, because God is an imaginary friend I'm allowed to have. So I went for Christianity. I was like, well, that's a kind of space for my imaginative life that's okay and is acceptable. And I must have been too clever by half as an 11-year-old, because that's a ridiculously level of like, sort of meta commentary. But I that was generally how I felt. I wanted my imagination to have more purchase, and I guess a more kind of realness, and accord it more realness, than society at that point I felt was letting me. So since that time, I see that all that kind of stuff is kind of like the kernels out of which my Druidry and my interest in magic kind of grew from.
Wonderful.
So,
yeah. What brought you to Druidry then? I mean, at what point did you join the order, or were you a Druid before that, or what were you doing?
So I used to read the Asterix the Gaul books, and I always wanted to be Getafix. It's the reason why I was with that big bucket and staring it very vigorously. And the Druids were always part of my awareness, because my mother's family are Welsh, and my dad's family are sort of London Irish. I've got sort of I've got sort of ancestors who are in England and Wales and Ireland. So there was always this kind of an awareness that these people called the Druids existed. And I always felt very sad, because I thought they didn't exist anymore. Until I think it was like a farmer in my village said, "Oh no, they still exist. They meet at the solstice, every summer in Stonehenge." And I was like, "Oh wow, so they actually exist." And I remember Googling, I don't know if it was Google then, it might have been Yahoo or something, looking up the Druids online, and I found the OBOD website. It looked amazing, and I was so excited. And I think I must have been about 14 or 15. But I was a bit worried, because I was like, what if it's like, a bit like a cult or something? So I didn't actually pursue it. I didn't reach out. I didn't sort of email the office or anything like that. Until I was sort of several years older, and I'd been sort of to university, and I'd been exploring sort of paganism and witchcraft and stuff throughout that time, and got really, really interested in it. Left Christianity behind, sort of dumped it. You know, I went sort of went and dumped it like you know, like, you know, just because it was really, I came out as gay, and I was exposed to a lot of very homophobic, very intolerant Christians at university, and I was just like, this is not for me at all. I don't know why I was pursuing this. So I got really into sort of, you know, interested in paganism and witchcraft. And then I remember I finished university, and I had the most depressing job that I've ever had at a market research firm. Uh, just like a fill-in job while I was waiting to start my master's. And I thought, well, you know what? I have this money. I have money coming in. I don't have anything else to do in my sort of evenings really while I'm saving up. Um, I'll sign up for OBOD, and I did. And the question came through, and I haven't looked back.
That's wonderful. There's a question I ask people: is Druidry something you are or something you do?
Oh, both. Can I have both? Is that allowed?
Is that the long answer or the short answer?
Well, it's probably a medium length answer. I think like I tend to always say that Druidry is a practice. So it's not focused on a specific belief system as such. I think there's maybe there's certain sort of prevailing questions and debates that Druids like to have, but I don't think it's a static belief system as such. So I certainly don't think it's something that you believe. So whenever anyone says, you know, what do Druids believe or whatever, I'm always like, oh, that's such a kind of a non-question. That's the wrong question to ask about Druidry. Because for me, Druidry is much more about, you know, a particular kind of relationship with nature that is inspired by a particular sort of body of cultural heritage that and spiritual heritage that emerges kind of out of the landscape of sort of northwestern Europe, really. And I think that is you know, and it can emerge from other landscapes as well. But I feel like the history, you can kind of follow the threads back to those lands. And I think it is, but that said, so it is a practice. It's something that you do, but I do feel that through those practices, it's something that becomes an inherent part of you. I feel that it's almost like this impulse that I can't quite. It's not just something that I could like, and I think this is why I get very frustrated, because whenever I've been in situations, because there have been times when I've lived somewhere far away from any grove, and I find it very difficult to practice. When you're in university and you've constantly got university accommodation, you've constantly got the kind of ground stuff like forbidding you from lighting candles, or your the amount of free space you've got is sort of 6 foot by 3 foot, and there's no way you could possibly cast a circle in it. You know, and I get very frustrated. My parents say, well, why don't you just take up something else? Why don't you just take up yoga, or
Much easier. Yes.
It'd be so much easier. And I'm just like, but it's not who I am, you know. So I think it is both. I would struggle to come down off that position.
But I'm a both and person rather than an either or. So personally, for me, in Irish, we can say is anam drí or drí atá anam, means I am a druid, but literally it means there's a druid in me. Or I can say is mis a drí, which means I am a druid. There's different ways of saying what you are. It's in you, which I think is, and the unan means in me, and that is for me, very, very powerful word, because it's something it's not a label, but it's something within, not on like a label. I am a druid, but it's in here. It's an internal thing.
So, I really like that, because I often struggle with the idea of the druid as a label, because I think as a label it doesn't really. It's you know, and I think it can be it can be a particularly frustrating label, because I think there are certain people who, and I think this is true of many magical traditions, who seek the label because they want to give themselves power and status. And I've never felt particularly I'm certainly not. I'm not. I've always found that very off-putting. That kind of trying to kind of, but you know, but it is a very, but it is something that's in me, and I can't do anything else. Like literally everything that I'm doing, I kind of, it feels like it feeds back to this sort of like, you know, little germ of druidness that kind of drives me. I don't know what I don't know what it's like, the central sinew that I think if you cut, there just probably wouldn't be anything there, you know.
I mean, and that's what happens with a relationship. You know, you have that sense, and there's no logic to it, but it's that thread, that strong cord of connection, of love, or whatever. And once it's cut, it's a serious wound. So I get that. And nice to come back to, you know, what do druids believe? When people say, do you worship? I go, no. I remember learning this from Olivia Robertson. You know, I knew Olivia, and she was one of Philip's teachers, and she was a friend of Ross Nichols and one of the co-founders of the Fellowship of Isis. And she used to say, you don't worship the goddess, you work with her. And there's something around that allows you agency. And I know, and I hope it's in the Bardic grade because I don't howlers, but there's something around when you go on a meditation and or you journey and you meet a guide, that you always take responsibility for your own actions. You don't say, well, my guides told me to murder so-and-so, or whatever it is, that you take responsibility. Nobody from the other world controls you. And there's that notion of you work with guides or ancestors or deity, if that is your calling. But it's working with but you can be in awe of somebody without handing over all responsibility to.
Absolutely. I feel like I always tell this to people. So whenever I meet kind of like, you know, sort of people who are very new in working with spirits and working with sort of land beings, I always say to them, this isn't like in Christianity where there is an assumption that this being is perfect and therefore you just have to follow what it says and just have faith. This is very different. You have to apply the same kind of broad principle that you would for engaging with a human being. So if someone comes up to you in the middle of the street and says, hi, I'd like you to give me your wallet, would you do that? And you'd be like, well, no. If someone said, you have to do absolutely everything I say, don't talk to anyone else, right, ever, you can only talk to me, I want you to love me unconditionally, even when I do things for you, I don't want you to ever doubt me, I don't want you, you know, if someone put all of those criteria on you, I think I would view that, because I don't think all Christians do, but I think I would view that as, I'm sorry, sort of like, you could hear my kind of response to my sort of like previous sort of involvement in Christianity in that. But like, I think I really want to be in a position where I can apply the same kinds of ethical and moral principles to my spiritual relationships and my relationships with spiritual beings that I do with human beings, because an ethical relationship is an ethical relationship is an ethical relationship, and there are every relationship has to be different because of the different sort of nature and status of the different people, but there are certain fundamental values that I think remain consistent. And one of the things I love about Druidry is it enables you to do that, and really that's a core principle. It's not something that you have to apologize for. Which
you're getting lots of thank you for this. This is from Virginia and California. Thank you for this advice, Jonathan. I'm new. What a brilliant way of putting it. It actually makes me feel so much better. Thank you. No blind following anything or anyone in life. In Christianity, they tell you if you don't obey the preacher, you're condemned. That's in some, and maybe more fundamentalist. It depends on where you are. I love this idea that we retain full responsibility for our spiritual path. That's from Eimear. Absolutely. And that is the one thing I've loved about the teachings in the order, is that you are responsible for all of your actions, that you don't, it's that, and that in a sense, that's because there's your moral compass. You don't need a big book. and
Yeah.
you don't need a list of rules and regulations. But for me, there's been so much, and Amelia's saying this is extremely helpful. Thank you. So we never know how these conversations are going to go. I only asked you a simple question, and look where it took us, which is beautiful. But you know that knowing that we are responsible, I found that personally myself is then I have agency.
Yeah.
I do go with the flow. I can hand things over because in terms of uncertainty, and we're living in a really uncertain time now, and not being able to control things. But there is something about going with the flow, about trusting in life. So it sounds clear and empowering when expressed that way. Absolutely. And I think that gives us agency, and I think having agency, but agency can be about thinking in the moment. I can control how I think right now. I can take a breath. I can't control anything out there, but right now I can do something. And even having agency in the present moment can be really empowering and hugely important.
Definitely. One thing I just want to sort of comment on, if I may, that you mentioned there that I think is so important, and that is another thing that I really love about most of ancient sort of European sort of philosophical systems in general, is that they tend to extol the virtue, a lot of them extol the virtues of moderation. So you've got a thing like piety, for example, to use a Roman example, and rather than saying it's a sort of a spectrum from good to bad, and you have to get as far towards good as possible, and you're never going to potentially get there, but you have to keep striving and striving and striving and striving, which is exhausting and impossible and hard and just something I don't like. You have these two poles, both of which you want to try and avoid, and you just kind of plot a middle course.
Can you repeat that? We lost you.
Oh no.
Oh my goodness. What did you say? Have you gone again?
No, I'm here. I'm here. Can you see me? Yeah.
Don't leave
Sorry.
me.
Sorry.
Just go back a few sentences.
Sure. So I was talking about how many ancient philosophies in Europe practice moderation. The idea that what you want is a middle point between two extremes. And it's the middle point which is the good place. And that's eminently achievable, rather than saying that the good thing is to get to this kind of extreme point, which is the nth version of something like humility or chastity or whatever, and which you're never going to get to. So the moderate point, and I feel that the moderate point is the same with autonomy, right? You have two extremes with autonomy. One which is where you've ceded all autonomy, and you just completely lie back and say, I'm not going to take control of absolutely anything. Everything, I'm just a complete pawn in someone else's game, which is obviously bad. But then you go right to the other end of the extreme, and that is when you try and assume control over everything, and that's also bad. It's because you're never going to be able to do that. So when you have faith and just trust in life, what you're not doing is you're not necessarily investing that unconditional trust in. It's not about investing unconditional trust in another being, like a single god or a person. What you're doing is you are it's a relaxing and an acknowledgement of your own limitations, and saying, look, there are certain things I'm never going to be able to affect, or if I could affect them, I've invested my energies elsewhere, things have happened, so I'm just going to let go. And that, I think thinking about it in those terms can be very, very helpful as well, because I think some people hear the word, trust in the process or trust in life, and they think, that there's some divine plan and they don't need to do anything. They don't need to take control of their own destiny. And I think that can.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that for me. It
doesn't mean that for me either. And I think I think for trusting in life trusting unconditionally in life is a different exercise to trusting unconditionally in a specific being who is outside of you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I tend to be trusting in the process of life. There was something really profound, and it's just gone from me.
Oh no! I scared it away. I'm so sorry. Okay.
No, you didn't. It was afterwards. Anyway, it's not meant to be. So, so to get back to this trusting or your spiritual path as a Druid, when has Druidry supported you?
So yeah, like I think my druidic practice has supported me a huge amount when it comes to giving me a sense of purpose in life. So like many of us, I went through my early 20s and had a real unsure. I was really unsure about where I wanted to go in my life.
Uh-huh.
Um, and because I went to I got into the university of my dreams. I had a wonderful time, but then I came to the end of that sort of 3-year undergrad course, and I was like, what do I do now? And I just didn't have any sense of direction or purpose after that. I sort of had a vague notion that I might do a PhD, but on what? Who knew? I certainly didn't at that stage. So what I kind of found is that in the process of doing the Bardic grade, particularly actually, it really helped me get to grips with different aspects of my personality, to understand who I really was and also kind of what I was for. And that was something that I think was critical to my development as a person. And I think that in society, I think there is an assumption quite often that you already should know that, or that is something that just kind of emerges organically, fully formed from you. And so it's kind of going back a little bit back, I guess, to that kind of is Druidry something you do or something you are? And I think that the assumption that in society we have is that whatever you're meant to do is something you just are, and you know what it is, and it's all clear, and you just need to do it, and that's fine. Simple and straightforward, fine. You're born and know immediately you're going to be an accountant. That's fine. But that's not really how it is for most people, and it certainly wasn't that way for me. So instead, like Druidry helped me, gave me exercises to explore things that I knew about myself, and through that, like following little forest paths, to actually sort of go down those paths and then find ultimately the lay of the land, and that was just and I think I found that a lot of other people I know who have come to Druidry relatively early in their lives, um, it can really help with particularly that period. But indeed, there are lots of people who face that sort of question, that sort of quest for purpose, at all stages of life. But a lot of my peers who came to Druidry in their 30s and they're in their 20s, talk about that kind of story. And I've got a friend who's a fantastic poet, for example, and she essentially discovered poetry through performing at Eisteddfodau, and they gave at OBOD camps, and they gave her this fantastic platform to then go off and become a professional poet. And I basically feel the same thing. I chose I actually got my PhD funding because of my patron goddess, who I kind of started working with through Druidry.
Who is
You
she?
know,
Who is she?
Solis Minerva.
Oh yeah, people will want to know.
Oh yeah. So my patron goddess is Solis Minerva. Solis is the springs at Bath. So if you've ever heard of the name Bath as a city in the UK, it is called Bath because there is a bath there, and it is filled with geothermal water that comes up from. It's like the only genuinely hot spring in the country, and it comes up from deep within the earth and fills this sort of what used to be a great sort of natural lake that would have been filled with this kind of reddish earth, but is now a sort of was converted into a Roman bathhouse initially, and then that was redeveloped into a kind of Georgian pump room and restaurant and spa. And you can still go there and bathe and take the waters, and it's really wonderful. And I would
I,
recommend that to anyone.
I've been there, but I didn't know you could take the. I've been where I suppose the interpretive part, where you go around and you see the. I didn't know anybody. I didn't see anybody in those baths unless there's another part.
Oh, yeah,
Not
so you're not. So Celis is not. She's not a safe goddess. So she's been known to be quite furious and to have a certain wrathful side, which I can talk a little bit more about. But actually, one of the and that manifests in lots of different ways. One is that there is a specific, I think, microorganism that lives in the water, lives in hot water. That if it goes up your nose, it causes encephalitis. And so effectively, it's actually very unsafe to go into certain hot springs because of this this
Ah,
microorganism that lives there. Um, so I like to think it's basically because Sulis is there. She's been forced to kind of like sit in this kind of, you know, sort of lead box, and then around the top, the architects installed all these Roman emperors kind of looking down at the waters in this kind of imperious fashion. So, you know, part of me interprets that as being her reaction to being like, I don't like being cooped up with all these men staring at me every hour of the day. But you can't. What they've done is they've drilled down via a borehole into the aquifer, and the water comes up into a municipal bath that's literally just down the road, and you can.
okay. Because I have some of her water in a bottle here on my shelf. So
Oh yes, I have 2 bottles of water from her on my altar, and I do rituals with them on a daily basis. So.
what's really interesting when I went to Bath was I bought a plaque, and it was the only Celtic pre-Roman artifact I think that they found when they were doing the excavations, and it's the triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. So I bought a copy of it, and I have it in one of my temples. So
I love that plaque. I think what I love about it's one of the things I think is a shame actually, and something I'd love to sort of, because Eimear, as you know, I've sort of bored you over many times with all my ideas that I've had for things I could be doing, and I feel like I'm sort of queuing them up, and we'll be working through them over the next 30 years. But like, one of the things I would really love to do is to draw on and popularize more Romano-British elements within Druidry, simply because there's some really wonderful and evocative symbolism and names and spaces that come down to us from the Romano-British period. And it's a little bit like medieval Ireland in that it's a time when a sort of illiterate sort of, essentially a sort of cultural, a literate kind of set of cultural influences and powers extend over a kind of a Celtic pre-Christian non-writing sort of society, and then that makes visible to us today a lot of the ideas and practices and customs that were already going on, and those can be really it's as a result it's a really fascinating lens to look through, and I think it's one that often people don't use as much in Britain. I always find it very interesting that a lot of British pagans today are much more likely to worship deities like the Morrigan, for example, than they are to worship deities like Coventina or Brigantia. Even though there's actual places, temples you can visit, there's sacred springs that you can make offerings to, and I think it's why do I think that is? So firstly, because the sort of Irish literary canon is so rich and so fantastic and so and complete. What we well, not complete, but it's much more. There's much more of it, I think. And there was also a much more sort of I think the Romantic movement in Ireland, I think, sort of engaged in a very effective and powerful way with that heritage. Whereas I think my impression of British Romanticism is it didn't really seek to do that quite so much, and I think that's not the case in Wales. But when I say that, I think what happened was that attention went towards Welsh sort of medieval literature and a lot of Arthurian medieval literature from the north of France, but it didn't go towards much of what was in England, because there isn't really very much in the way of epic, for example, that emerged from the Romano-British period, or indeed from the Anglo-Saxon period, which came later. And those that are quite small compared to the much larger canon that you get from Wales and Ireland and from northern France.
Okay. So, okay, you have this long list of things that you're going to do. So I'm going to put it to you now. How do you see your Your responsibility as a future ancestor.
Oh, what a wonderful question. So I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I have kind of chosen my job because I feel I have a huge responsibility as a future ancestor. If I'm honest, and this is probably a bit of a, this probably puts me on the spot a little bit, but I feel like even though I enjoy my job, I think that there are probably other things that I would prefer to spend more of my time doing. I'd love to write more. I'd love to, go do more tarot reading. I'd love to sort of divert a lot of my energies in that direction, and I think I may well do that still in my life. But I'm really, really, really conscious of the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the way that our world is current and like in the next 10 years is on a precipice. And it needs people to spend their energies towards making a difference. And I happen to be fortunate enough to have the skills and the qualifications to make a difference in my capacity as a social scientist and as an analyst of people's behavior. And so I feel that even though I think there are other things I could be doing, and I want to, I definitely want to spend my probably some time in my future years working more in the realms of mythology and folklore, um, and ritual. I feel that I at the moment there are these huge issues, and I have a duty to at least give it a go to see if I can put my shoulder to the wheel, make sure that we can make the changes as a society, as a global society that we need to make. So I feel like I feel kind of, you know, there is a part of me that always used to be like throughout my 20s. I didn't spend most of my 20s having fun. I didn't travel very much. I didn't, go away and have lots of parties. I didn't really do that. I just sort of devoted myself to getting qualifications and um, building up my career and getting to now where I'm actually being able to input into pretty sort of big decisions and things that are being made but within the world. And so I feel that that's one of that at the moment is one of the major ways in which I'm trying to make myself a better ancestor. But there are other things as well that I want to do. I want to learn Welsh. I want to become fluent in Welsh because I feel that language is one of the most important gifts that we can give to future generations. And I've already just kind of made a decision that I'm probably not going to have children because I feel that it's for a number of reasons, but I think mainly that there are so many young people and children that don't have the support that they need in society. So I feel like if I can give of that share, I guess what might otherwise go towards having children, towards supporting the betterment of society in general, and sort of helping the children of others, then I think that that's an equally valuable way of being a good ancestor. I may change my mind, but I think those are a couple of things.
Somebody says, can you tell us what kind of decisions? I'm not too sure what that's Poppy means. But
oh, she means what decisions am I feeding in on? I can't really talk about so my day job, I'm a civil servant for the UK government. And I, as a social scientist, I advise the UK government on effectively how policy will interact with people's behaviour and the way people act day to day. But obviously, I'm not talking in a capacity as a civil servant here, than just personally. But I can't really talk a huge amount about that because it's obviously I'm not really. You need to go through the press office and the comms team before you say stuff in an official capacity. But yeah, so I work on.
I would ask you a question. Not. It's. Do you feel okay? Are they taking your advice? Do you feel that the job you're doing, that you are actually making an impact, and that's not a reflection on you, but I mean in terms of the context in which you're working, are you allowed to make an impact? Because I know my husband was asked to develop a child and adolescent psychiatric service, and he was frustrated every step along the way, so that he couldn't possibly do it. And yet the rhetoric was, this is what you have to do. And I wonder, now maybe you can't answer that question either, I've just realized.
Well, I mean, obviously, I mean, essentially it's not really, to a certain extent I can't answer the question, because, you know, if I
Okay.
you know, but I do think but I do think I am able to make a difference, actually. And I think that's actually, I mean, because I don't want to say, oh yes, everything's fine. And I also, but I probably can't be as candid as I would be in you know, one-to-one about my opinions, and I'm not really enabled to do that about political issues. That's not how it works. But I do think that actually you know, because I've seen how my advice has changed things, and I've seen how my advice has been taken on board to alter stuff. And I obviously can't really talk about specifics, but you can make changes. And I think you just have to kind of moderate your because you also, I think it's just about kind of moderating your expectations a bit, because it's unlikely that you would, because I think it's also very difficult, because if you're only in one small part of the system, there's going to be tons of things pressing in against you. But if enough people in all different parts of society all start advocating for a specific set of changes, and working together in concert, then that is when you actually see, you know, the significant type of changes that we're looking to make. So yeah, I do think without going into any more detail, that I'm
I
not,
think
not allowed to do.
and I think in, you know, we were talking earlier about purpose. I know in my lecturing in human development, I use the teachings of a healer called Malidoma Somé from Burkina Faso, who lives in the US. But he talks about in the tribe in which he comes from, that everybody's born with a purpose, and the community gather around the pregnant mother, and the spirit of the baby speaks through the mother and says, my name will be Jonathan, and my life purpose is blah, blah. But it doesn't say how that will be achieved. Just the purpose is named. And his Malidoma, he who must make friends with the enemy or the stranger. So that was his purpose. But it was never clear until he was in his 20s how that was to be fulfilled.
Amazing.
So we do have a purpose, but I think sometimes some people, like you say, you're born at 4, I'm going to be an accountant. That's what my daddy is or my mother is, and I'm going to be that way. I wanted to be a doctor. My father was a doctor, and I was too lazy. But I mean, I became a holistic psychologist, herbalist, work energetic, you know, a celebrant. So I do mind, body, spirit anyway, is what I do, but not as a doctor. And I'm glad I was lazy. But some people know from a very, very early age that's what they're going to do, and that's what they did. But then for many people, the road is not straight. It just goes in and out and spirals, which makes life very, very interesting. And so to have a sense of purpose and for meaning in the purpose is to have a sense that, yes, I am making some impact. You know, even our conversation has an impact. I'm just looking at the comments. You know, people are really, really making. So you can look at those afterwards as well. There's too many to mention that, and these fireside chats are having an impact on people. Mm-hmm. When my guests speak, people say, "Wow, this has been really," or "You're speaking to me tonight." Even that leaves an impact, and you might never know it, but that there's the silent impact that you have, or you know, you've published 20 books, or you've become famous, or whatever it is. But I do think we need to have a sense of meaning.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Somebody's listening to me, even if it's just one person.
Exactly. In fact, that I remember actually when I was asked. Oh God, this is going to sound like the most romantic story ever. So brace yourself.
We'll have a hanky.
So when I was 18, I went with with a group of like people from my school. We went on like a trip to Italy as like a school trip to go and look at like Rome and Pompeii and Herculaneum. And we were in oh good gosh, the name of the place is, on the Bay of Naples. There's Sorrento, just on the edge of the Bay of Naples, and we went down to the. I mean, this was quite late at night. And we went down to the water, and it was the middle of summer, so the sun was only just setting, and we went down to this quayside, and we were standing there. And I remember one of my friends asking me, "What is like your idea of hell to me?" And I remember like looking at this kind of gorgeous view and thinking about it for a bit and being like, I think it's a lack of purpose.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I guess it's because I just have a lot of energy, and I think it has to go somewhere. And it's yeah, and I think, as you say, I really love your point about the fact that everyone has something they can do, and that everyone can be a small part of the overall picture. And I think, as I say, part of the journey that I've been on is like recognizing what I can do, what I want to do, what I could do, but also what I should do now. And I think that is that's the kind of recipe, if you like, for a life of purpose.
Now, Sean Hinchcliffe has a book. What's your favorite book? Okay, there's 2 questions. Your favorite book, but are you a magician or a mystic? And he says, a very interesting, knowledgeable young man who I could listen to for hours. So that's a nice
one. I can bottle that and take that with me every day. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. What is my favorite? Well, I'll answer magician or mystic first, and I would say that I'm probably definitely gosh, it must be. It's getting on at 9 o'clock. I'm probably definitely. No, I am definitely more towards the mystic end. I often go for like months at a time without casting a spell or doing anything like that, because I often don't feel the need. It's very odd. Like, I know some people who are really, active witches who are just like, spell. But I tend to do a lot less of that. I'm much more about kind of, this one, like marinating, I guess, in the kind of occult atmosphere. Like, I mean, what things that the kind of rituals that I really like most when we're actually making things like making offerings. I really enjoy and get a lot out of, making an offering. And it's not necessarily out of a spirit of worship. It more feels like reciprocity, or like, how would I describe it? Like
saying thank you.
Saying thank you. Yeah, it's just, I love that.
When you visit somebody, or I'd like to bring a gift to you, whatever it is, a pot of jam, something I've made. It's that, or something of you.
Yes, it's
what,
that.
What kind of offerings do you make, as a matter of interest?
Very good question. So, different spirits like different things. Sulis likes water, as you'd expect. There's actually a very strong tradition in English folklore about giving water back to spirits who are water spirits, which is quite interesting. She also is very good at receiving things that have been taken from you. So. So this is actually what people used to do in Romano-British times. Whenever someone had stolen something from you, or had so you'd been like, particularly in the baths, right? So you have this image of a Roman bath, and all these people go to, going there, and someone loses their ring or their favorite toga or whatever, and they get furious about it because I don't know if I can swear, but
you can.
some disreputable so-and-so has walked off with my treasured possession. And so they would go to the temple, and they would give that thing that had been taken from them to Sulis and say, now you can go and reclaim it from the person who's taken it. Right. Often they kind of suggest to Sulis all sorts of horrible things that could happen to the person which I tend to, but I often think of her as a goddess about reconciling loss and reconciling things that have been taken from you. By giving them to her, it's a way of letting go. And so I often do that.
You mean metaphorically handing them over to her, because if it's already taken, you can have it literally.
You pass ownership of it to her. But then, yeah, all sorts of other things like metal. Sometimes I offer that. Incense, essential oils, and my favorite book. I just want to get my favorite book before.
She was just Kate Fulcher. It means more to you personally as it's a gift given in full intent rather than part of a routine. I think that's. I'm not sure if it's a statement or a question, although she has.
I
I
really.
have to attempt to help you word it. This is Kate. Oh, okay, thank you, Kate.
It means more to you personally as it's a gift given in full intent rather than part of a routine. It's interesting that because I've started inspired in part by sort of Hindu friends of mine. I've started doing offerings much more regularly and routinely, and that's actually something that talking about this long list of things I'm going to be doing over the next 30 years. I definitely want to sort of bring in a concept of like how to make offerings, and really kind of explore that a bit within a druidic context, and maybe write a book about it or something, because it's I think it's obviously something that's deeply associated with Druidry, and it's something we all do. But I think there's been books about meditative Druidry. There's been a lot of work on rites of passage and celebrancy. But I think there's a bit of a niche for some writing about offerings, and I'd like to do something like that. But I was
your favorite book. Go on.
my favorite book. I was going to say, I think that probably my favorite book, if we're talking fiction, one of my favorite books is The Fifth Sacred Thing by Starhawk, which is really wonderful. And if we're talking about non-fiction, I'm going to be very, very, very basic and just be like anything by Ronald Hutton. Like Ronald Hutton, it's just you can sit there, sit for hours, reading happily, going on these wonderful tours.
Yeah.
It's just fantastic. But yes, thank you for the question.
So just to get back to your offerings, do you have a daily daily personal practice?
I do. So I generally do a sort of an adapted version of the light body exercise and the sacred grove exercise as the beginning of the practice, and it's often really quick. So I would just do sort of go into my grove, take 3 breaths, and then probably and then sort of do the light body exercise, and then I would say a couple of prayers, ring a bell, and then sort of offer some water and so on. And I think one of the things that I do find a bit difficult is that I need to start finding a way, something that I can do that's a little bit less like candles and flames and stuff and incense, because oftentimes I do it just before bed, and then if I sort of make it can be a bit intense if you're just going to sleep just after having lit some incense. So I'm still sort of working through that and developing that, but that is kind of my sort of main focus, I think, of my sort of daily practice.
Oh, beautiful. Just Cherie said she didn't catch the name of your favorite author. Just after this, can you put it into the chat box?
Yeah, sure.
And put it there. What else was I going to ask you? All right. You've got a list of 30 things you're going to do. Is it 30 things or over the next 30 years? I can't remember.
The next 30 years.
I'm not going to tie you to a number. But so far, what would you say you're most proud of in terms of achievements?
Oh gosh, so my PhD is definitely something I'm really, really proud of. It was, as I say, it felt like it was a gift from Solace. I only found it when I was helping a friend, and she'd said, "Don't worry." When I'd been meditating with her a month previously, again another boring job. I feeling very desolate. She said, "Don't worry, I'll sort it out for you." And I was literally helping a friend apply to my own old university and looking at my department website, and there was suddenly this perfect fully funded PhD place being advertised as a job, and I applied for it, got it, and this was after years and years and years of not getting anywhere with funding applications. So it was incredible. It felt miraculous. So managing to kind of complete that and then get published, my thesis published as a monograph was something I was very proud of. I was very proud of getting to the Druid grade. I do feel like that's an achievement, particularly when everyone talks about how scary and difficult the OVATE grade is. Like when I first started it, I was terrified I was gonna, I don't know, I was gonna sort of grow horns or something. Yeah,
Were you
like
going to grow horns? Is that what you said?
grow horns or something. I don't know. People were telling me all sorts of horror stories about the OVATE grade.
Oh,
Um,
so funny.
I don't know why everyone always said the OVATE grade was very difficult. Oh gosh, what else? Yeah, just I think those two things have probably been the things that my most long-term things that I've invested a huge amount of energy in. Um, but actually, one other thing, and this takes us back to is that I remember when I was about probably about 19, I promised to the winter sun and various other sort of spirits while I was sort of out for this kind of meditative walk at the solstice, that I would bring the people back to the gods. Like that, like it was very kind of somewhat inspired by watching that wonderful sort of mini series with Miranda Richardson and in which is like called Merlin. That I think some druids actually in OBOD actually advised on the structure, but it's basically about the life of Merlin. And it's basically all about magic going away because people stop believing in the gods. And I think I watched that when I was 19 and was like, oh, that's terrible. That's such an injustice. We need more magic back. So I said to all the spirits, I'd bring the people back. The delusions of grandeur that go with being 19, I suppose. And then I remember a couple of years ago, while I was sort of working with the British Pilgrimage Trust, I managed to convince them to take to sort of take a pilgrimage directly into the baths, the Roman baths,
Okay.
and got a bunch of pilgrims, most of whom had no involvement in paganism or anything before, to essentially sort of pay homage to Sulis and to make offerings to the waters. And Matt McCabe, who's a member of the order, blessed them while they were there, and it was beautiful and it was just amazing. And I was like, oh my god, I managed to kind of, and it was the whole thing was. It was really, really wonderful. It was like I'd finally kind of fulfilled a promise. It was just really special. Someone said false.
Oh, no, that was a mistake. So I don't know what it is. Sorry, it was Ellie had said, what was the subject of your PhD?
Oh, subject of my PhD. So the subject of my PhD was the short answer is common sense. Was the subject of my PhD, which isn't very common, alas. And in fact, I actually wrote a whole section of my chapter on the joke. That joke. Would you believe? But yeah, so I basically, what I wanted to do is I wanted to study people's relationship with the landscape and with the environment. And I spent sort of about 14 months in the Broads National Park, sort of developing an understanding of how land management practices are shaped by cultural attitudes, basically I thought about a number of different ways I could kind of try and unpack some of all the different relationships between land and labor and history and knowledge and how they all came together. And eventually I sort of thought, I think it was something one of my informants said, and they mentioned common sense. And I thought, people talk about common sense a lot when they talk about what they're doing with the land, or, why such and such an idea by such and such a politician is good or bad. And I was like, oh, okay. I wonder if anything in anthropology has been written about common sense in the past. And what I found was that even though there's been a couple of essays that have been written, very theoretical ones. So I'm an anthropologist. There was no like actual ethnographies where people had gone out and actually studied what common sense, when English speakers talk about it, actually is. So I thought, I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll do my PhD on that. So I literally wrote the book on common sense, which is probably one of the most, which is probably one of the least commonsensical things for anyone to do ever, to write an academic dissertation on common sense. Nonetheless, that's what I decided to do.
I love it. Fascinating. Okay. What is the most reckless thing you've done?
I'm actually a very unreckless person. So So it's actually very difficult for me to think of anything where I've been genuinely reckless. Um, what would be a good example? Probably, well, this is a recent example. I actually moved back to London in the middle of the pandemic, because there were a couple of reasons, but basically I just sort of thought, I thought it was, we were getting towards the end of it, and I was like, I've spent some, I actually, because I'd moved out just beforehand, and I felt quite isolated where I was. Yeah, so what I did is I came, I moved back, but unfortunately I couldn't go and view the property beforehand. So I just thought, you know what, I'll just go for it, and I agreed to rent it. But unfortunately, the property turned out to not be really nice at all, so I had to kind of move back, which is probably one of the most reckless things I've ever done. And after having had to sort of move out at the end of my initial 6-month lease, I think I definitely don't enjoy being reckless, and I probably won't ever do it again.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. So that's one of your regrets then.
Yeah, that's definitely a regret. I think probably another regret is, it was the next question. What are my regrets? Oh, great. I'm ahead of the game here, Eva. I'm pulling your questions out before you're ready. What is one of my biggest regrets? I actually think probably one of my biggest regrets is not doing art as a GCSE.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that sounds great, because I'd love to be able to draw, and I never had like a structured, or have some kind of sort of, and some kind of visual medium to kind of express myself through, because I've got a very vivid visual imagination, but I've never really painted or drawn or anything like that. So I tend to use words instead. I tend to write. But when I was studying, when I was doing my GCSEs, I I just was completely scared of my art teacher. Well, I was not scared of my art teacher, scared by my art teacher, because she sat me down and was like, "Now look, I'll let you do art GCSE, but you have to work really, 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 really hard. It's really difficult. It's not a DOS. You've just got to work really, really hard." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I remember at the time thinking, she obviously doesn't want me to do it, so I'm not going to do it. And I went and chose electronics instead, which I've never used ever subsequently. Um, uh, so what I ended up kind of doing then, as a result, is just switching to so yeah, I just switched to electronics, and it was really quite it ended up being really not very rewarding, which is a bit of a shame. And I think what the reason why she was actually saying that was because she really didn't, because I think she had a lot of other students who chose art because they wanted an easy option, and she was a bit sick of that. So I think she
Oh,
was just managing the intake of people coming into her particular course. So I don't hold any animosity to her, but I think that's always something I've regretted, like not actually spending some time learning how to draw or learning how to paint, because I think I would have got a lot out of it.
it's a pity, because it's interesting how a comment from somebody can actually make you or break you in some sense. Here she is trying to be parental with you. Now you have to really work hard, but that's something. What she needed to do was encourage you,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the student who needs encouragement, not to be dumbed down. And I mean, so many people, have been influenced by teachers. They say, this was my favorite subject. I loved history and Irish because I really had really good and a good history teacher and a good Irish teacher. Hated maths. I had a really bad teacher, terrified the hell out of me. So, and it's like, you can have a good experience and you really engage with the subject, or you have a really bad one, or you're not great at the subject, but you have a really, really inspiring teacher who is really good at teaching people who don't get it, who are very good at explaining things. And Chrissy Kimber here, getting in a car with me driving last year in Ireland was reckless, Jonathan. So you've got another thing to add to your list. I love it. Thanks, Chrissy.
I don't regret it for a minute, Chrissy. That was it was a pleasure, albeit an exciting one.
Oh, and that was my last gathering, actually.
It was awful, that gathering.
Yeah, pre pre all of this.
I know, those halcyon days.
Well, actually, that's something I'm really grateful for that we had. So my next question is, what are the things that you're grateful for?
Oh wow! I mean, I think I mean, this can easily turn into I'm someone who's been very fortunate in my life, so I'm so grateful to have such a sort of wonderful, loving family.
Great.
My parents have always been really supportive of me. They've always been very, like, my mum in particular has been very invested and like encouraging towards my sort of spiritual explorations and stuff. She's very interested in the family history, and so she's always been talking to me about, you know, like my grandfather, my great grandfather's sort of, involvement in Welsh football, my great grandfather's being the mayor of Wrexham, and all these sorts of like wonderful things, and the connections with Welsh culture and Druidry ultimately, if you in some cases, that emerge through that. I think it's great because, as you could probably tell from that previous story, I'm quite impressionable. So having like sort of and my the rest of my family are all very kind of like strong, quite forceful personalities. Like my sister is really passionate and really, she's always been like my sort of, such a wonderful cheerleader for me and really encouraging me. But I'm also tremendously grateful for the experiences that I had at just a particular thing that I want to mention in kind of this forum, at OBOD, formerly OBOD camps, now WARS camps. That kind of like community environment was just tremendously helpful and really, really empowering, and really kind of like turbocharged my Druidry in many respects. And I met such wonderful people through that. And I think, and through the order as a whole. And I think it was just, what was great about it is I think spaces like that really give you the opportunity to actually to really kind of get close and interconnected with the land itself, and to really kind of draw strength from it, but also to give something back. And what I sort of found particularly kind of nourishing about is that OBOD camps was literally just down the road. Like they held the camps, they're literally just down the road from where I grew up. So I was very much in my landscape, and it was just incredible to be able to kind of like get involved in a kind of OBOD event that was in a place that I knew so well and that I felt so at home in, and I already knew all the spirits and knew the kind of rhythms of the land and stuff. So yeah, it was those are just a couple of things, but like I'm one of those, as you can tell from someone who gives, as you could probably assume from someone who leaves loads of offerings, there are loads of things I'm grateful for. So I could probably, you know talk about this wonderful flat I've just moved into that I really love, talk about a lovely housemate who just made me dinner before we started, and I'm just like, I'm so
Oh,
grateful.
wonderful. Somebody says, do you have an animal companion?
I do, yes. I don't have it depends on what we mean by an animal. Do we mean a familiar spirit or do we mean a pet?
There's a question. So that needs to be clarified, I think.
Yes.
So just one thing, I suppose is kind of connected with grateful, but what do you do to give you joy?
Oh, not enough would probably be I'm a bit of a workaholic, so I'm always kind of like I'm always kind of like pressing myself to like, work very long hours, did the same on the PhD. And I'm always
It's
like, feel like I have to be.
PhD is over.
It's over now. I graduated in
It is.
2018.
I'm telling you. I'm telling you. You
Yeah,
don't
it's
have
over. Oh, you're telling me. Yeah, yeah. No, it's over. It's done now.
real life
Um,
animal, Linda says.
Pardon?
A real life animal.
A
Do
real
you have a
life animal? No, I don't. I'm very sad about that. I really want one. It's not really suitable to have a dog here. It's a bit of a small flat for that. But me and my flatmate would love a dog. And we keep talking about it. To be honest, I'd love like what would I probably like? I'd love like a rabbit or something like that. That would be really sweet. I love rabbits. Um, yeah, no. So sadly, no real life companions. But yeah, like what do I do that makes me joy? I love going for walks. In
Mm.
fact, walking is probably the essence of my spirituality as well. I also go to the gym quite a lot, which obviously I'm not doing at the moment, but working out at home. I love like I'm also kind of a bit of a fan of like ASMR. So like there's a lot of like really lovely sort of relaxing videos you get on YouTube where people sort of like will often like just talk through a story in a soft voice, so and it's just very, very relaxing at the end of a long day. Watch a lot of films. Yeah, gosh, this is sounding like a kind of I don't know, I'm just sort of rattling things off, aren't I? Yeah, probably what gives me the most joy? Nature gives me the most joy, I think.
Yeah, I think for me is one of these wonderful things is opening my shutters in the morning, and it happened a few weeks ago. It's been very, very dull for weeks, and I open my shutters, and there's a blue sky, and this I have a garden with silver birch, and the sun, the eastern sun, is shining on them, and straight away it's like woo. I can feel myself getting high. I mean, not as a kite, but just that huge lift, and it's those simple things, or there's a pair of bullfinches now in the garden, and
Lovely.
small little things like that, or seeing my first primrose, or it's that kind. And it's those simple things, because living now our lives so confined, being able to see such magic in simplicity, it is wonderful.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
just one. I love this conversation. This is from Tara McCormack. Thank you. Apologies for leaving early. Valerie, I must leave. It's been a very nice and interesting meeting. Thank you both. That's from Cordoba in Argentina. So,
wonderful.
Poppy says she likes the same things as you. And Kate Fulcher, now this is an interesting question. What helps to ground you the most?
Wow. Probably that daily practice that I mentioned. That's the thing that I do at the end of the day that just means like just like shed all of the stress, and kind of, because I'm a Gemini, very typical of being a Gemini, and so that my head is always kind of full of like loads of stuff that's going on. So I really need a kind of a firm sort of endpoint to the day, and that's the best thing.
Yeah. So you do your grounding, or your practice at the end of the day, yeah? Okay, I do mine at the beginning, but it's it's everything. It's you do the practice that suits you best.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I did it at the beginning, I'd end up being too distracted by what I found it very rewarding when I have done it at the beginning. But if there's any stressors, I find it really hard to get into that mindset. So it's really interesting. I think I think everyone's gonna probably, as you say, you find the right time for you. How long did it take you to kind of get into the rhythm of doing a break? Did you find it quite easy?
I was straight away. No, I'm not a routine-y person, but there's something around. I think Kate managed to articulate what she meant about routine and doing making offerings. That when you do it often enough, it becomes second nature to you. And I think that's what she meant by routine. I light a candle, and then there's certain things when I wake up. I learned that. Okay, so as soon as I wake up, I'm not a morning person. I'm very slow. So I'm lying still in bed, and then I come through these prayers. I do them in Irish. Then I do breathing, and then I get up, do a bit of yoga, and not long. And but once I'm down in my space, my workspace, or if it's in the kitchen, I light a candle, and then I open space. So and that is so. The lying in the bed helps my soul to catch up to actually, okay, now I can get out of bed because I'm slow. And then I'm going to do some work, is lighting that candle and opening space and calling on whatever it is I need. And the ancestors, that grounds me. And I think once I have the candle lit, I'm set up for the day. And I have a healing candle, and I include people for healing. So that has set me up for the day.
That's so nice.
It sounds very that I'm really devout and things. It's not, but actually, it's it's getting easier and easier and easier to do, and I know it works. It's not about, well, I should be praying on my knees 20 times a day or whatever it is. Where I brought up Roman Catholic, and you should be going to church, and you should be doing this, that, and the other. Well, with Druidry, you don't. It's the practice that suits you. If it's a minute, or somebody, one of my guests said, it might have been Ricky, during the day, he will take 3 breaths, with the earth, the sky, and the sea. And that, or I think maybe Jane Myatt might have said, and a number of people said that, and that's as simple, that's 3 breaths. You're breathing in, but it's kind of conscious breathing. That can have a huge impact. And it doesn't have to be hard. I was brought up with the notion of acts of mortification. Things must be hard. So you fast because it's hard, and you don't eat meat on a Friday. I love fish, so it's not a punishment. And I do fast, and I don't find it hard. It actually makes me feel good. So it's like I'm not into hardness, or the harshness of decisions where I suffer. I actually find it really, really helpful to me. So yeah, but it took me time to work that out and to be confident that I was doing enough. A lot of it is, am I doing enough? I'm not doing enough. I should be trying harder. I have, fantasies about other druids. They must be more devout or more in connection with me, blah, blah, or than I am, all of that kind of stuff. And I've gotten rid of that, Holly Munford says, for her as a bard, it's music. As a novate, she's learning to widen out and to share with others. And then Kate, who asked that question, thank you both for the chance to interact and ask questions. It means a lot to be able to feel a part of a conversation and community. She's been maybe she hasn't finished that sentence, but so it's about finding, and with the Gwers, you get different exercises to do. And initially I thought, there's all of these things. So each booklet has something else you can do. Do you do all of those for the rest of your life? And it's no. This is a menu of things that you try and work with. So when you're on the bardic grade, you're working with the various elements, and then you find, which is the element you're comfortable with, and which is the one that you need more of, and you focus on that. And then you navigate your way through all grades to find the practice, and because there's a huge menu, which is wonderful, because there's no one way to be a druid, and that's what's beautiful.
It is, and I think that kind of speaks to the, in a way, like I love some people. Sometimes you'll have this conversation with people where they want to know what the sacred book is of Druidry. They're kind of thinking that the way that other faiths are organized is the blueprint for what all spiritual traditions will adhere to. I think that, I always say, well, Druidry is based around the book of nature, and it's not just nature, trees and grass and water and stuff. It's your nature. And I think all of our nature, and the fact is that our nature means that we are quite different, and there are a great deal of variations, and there'll be things that work for some people, and there's no guarantee that they'll necessarily work for someone else. And so I think setting down these extremely strict kind of rules and regulations for people it's just not the correct approach, in my opinion.
No, and I think Druidry today is finding a relevance because of that lack of dogmatism. It's that you are free to choose. There's so much diversity within. There are certain principles that connect us, but there's space for all that diversity. So I've been reading about the innate immune system and our gut microbiomes, and having all this rich diversity of viruses, bacteria, fungi in our guts, inside and out of us. So here we are fighting one big virus at the moment, when in fact they're everywhere. And that every and each person has a different biome, a microbiome. It's different for everybody, but it means that we are part of nature. It's not about we as humans need to be nice to nature or care for nature or protect it. Is that we are nature, and it's that recognizing we are all we're all part of a big web.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, like I think there's I always like to think that that there is evidence for this now, kind of like proving really that for a very long time I think a lot of the mindset of the research community was very much guided by this set of cultural principles that were very high in their sort of sensibility. Human beings are kind of separate and sovereign from nature, um, and in fact, there's a wealth of research from psychology and anthropology and other social sciences that look at how human beings are inherently and intimately interconnected with their environment. Our well-being, for example, is significantly enhanced if you're exposed to kind of green space. And what I think is really wonderful about that is that that's starting to change the attitude of institutions and the attitudes of organizations, so that they now see the merits of understanding how that connection between people and nature, and not just assuming that things have to operate in a very how would I describe it? Operate in a very kind of like sort of classically modern, everything's clean, chrome, concrete type way. And I must say I think that that's actually something that Druidry has an awful lot of relevance for. And as soon as whenever I mean, I'm sure you found this as well, Eimear, like whenever I'm in a space where I'm invited to talk about Druidry, and I'm, and it's and where it's not, obviously people are interested in it. If you go to like a sort of a pagan space or like a pagan bookshop, esoteric bookshop and stuff, people are interested, and you expect them to be. But if you go, even when you go to spaces which are talking about,
Oh, you've come
conservation.
back. We both
Oh,
disappeared. Could go back a sentence or two. Sorry about that. My internet connection just went.
oh, sorry. Yes, no, what was I saying? I was gather my thoughts. Yes, so the fact that you expect to be of interest to a kind of a sort of an esoteric or a pagan sort of group, but if you go to like now, if you go to like who are interested in, let's say, um, you know, children's education in nature, or a conference that's about the sort of health and well-being agenda and how nature can contribute to that, people are really interested in what Druids have to say, because we've been focusing on this stuff and working with this stuff for decades, or if not longer. And I think actually for me there's a really interesting possibility there, or potential there, for thinking about how Druidry can move from quite I think what we've been for quite a while, which is quite almost like a reactive posture. So if people come to us, we share what we know with them, and whether or not we want to move to a more proactive posture where we're actually thinking about ways of kind of broadening accessibility and making it so that people find it easier to get to our ideas. I mean, I think it's an open question. I don't have a really strong view either way, because I think there are pros and cons. But I certainly think, if we were to want to sort of, or if some group of enterprising druids somewhere were of a mind to set up some kind of outreach organization which existed to kind of, share druidic ideas and attend conferences and stuff, I think they'd experience a really positive reception. And I just think it's so surprising when you think about how dramatically different that landscape is to how things were, 30 or 40 years ago, where people would
Mhm.
have just been like, oh, it's completely, it's a load of nonsense. It's just a bunch of, uh, old men in white robes. I think it's really become something much more exciting.
And
Um,
I think the fact that we're having this conversation online,
yeah,
and these conversations are watched by thousands of people who are not druids. I mean, not only druids. Um, and then people have joined the order as a result of watching them, or the same with Philip's Teas. And that it's ordinary people, you and I, having a conversation, and people go, okay, they're not all men with white beards. By the way, real druids wear lipstick. That's my flag. But
I love
uh,
that. That's
but
I don't have mine on. No, I should have. I didn't know.
But it's ordinary people having ordinary conversation or having fascinating conversations. And this is my, the whole thing about these fireside chats is to, I say ordinary members as in not the really, really, really famous, well-known big names in Druidry, but nobody I've had as a guest has been ordinary. They've been extraordinary. And it's around finding the extraordinary story in ordinary everyday druids, and that's magic.
It is. I'm always, whenever I go to gatherings at Glastonbury or any other sort of OBOD event, I am so struck by how amazing and wonderful everyone, so all the people are. Like, you get to talk to them about their lives and about the things that they do. And I mentioned my friend who became a poet after performing at Eisteddfodau at camps. Like, there's I can't remember the full name of I can't remember the most up-to-date figures now, but there's 24,000 stories like that in OBOD. And I just think it's really, really, really wonderful to see how this system of wisdom, of training in a wisdom tradition, and how this mystery school has essentially created this wonderful kind of way of helping people grow. And it's really beautiful to see. And it's every huh
and that's been my story,
yeah.
doing this. I know you're birth. You said that you're quiet and you're easily influenced. And what did you say? Impressionable, suggestible.
Impressionable, yes.
You also strike me as somebody who's loaded with energy. My God, you buzz with it and buzz with ideas. You probably mentioned it, but just maybe to have a conversation around this. One big concern about the modern world that you have.
So I think I think there are. I mean, I mentioned climate change and I mentioned the biodiversity crisis, and I think that fundamentally, one of my biggest concerns is that we attempt to try and fix these things from a technical standpoint, but not a cultural standpoint. I feel that there are things that I think that fortunately, I think that the conversation has moved on from this now. Because I remember when I started my, my time with Druidry, I think the view was very much, oh, it's fine, technology will save us. We will innovate our way out of the problem. It's quite clear that while technology is an intrinsic part of the solution and you won't get anywhere without it, there's also got to be significant changes in how we behave and the way our culture works. And I think that one of the things that I find particularly worrying is the extent to which our exposure to nature at a young age is becoming increasingly curtailed.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that I would really, one worry that I have is that, because I know that my formative experiences in nature as a very small child were fundamentally connected with my sort of growing spiritual sense. And I think while the internet is an amazing tool and we're having this wonderful conversation right now, I feel that it is that stressing kind of like literacy and internet access for children at the expense of stressing access to nature is something that really, really does concern me a lot. And I think that is something that I think one of the things that I've always found really wonderful about Druidry is I know so many wonderful people within the Druid community who are also members of the Forest Schools community. And I think that there's a great deal of cross-pollination between kind of the Druidic principles of, celebrating creativity, having a sort of a loving yet sort of respectful relationship towards nature, and valuing peace and kind of and justice in a sense of understand. Those are good values to teach children, and I think that they work very well within a kind of a pedagogical context.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so. That's something that I've I know. I feel that we may yet steer ourselves away from the kind of the bad version of our future that I was kind of worried about maybe sort of 7 years ago, where I was thinking, God, we're going to go down this kind of like very, very high tech attempt to sort of fix climate change. And the problem is that if you don't, even if we did fix the specific problem, if you don't change the attitude that underlines that caused the problem in the first place, then it's likely that you'll just end up repeating the same mistakes in a different way. What's your biggest concern, would you say, Eimear?
Oh, just that thing about the hubris around technology will fix this problem, and technology in health. That is a concern for me. You know, we need to be focusing on our own health, what we can do, how we eat, how we take care of our own health, our own innate immune system. This is something that concerns me, and particularly now, dealing with this pandemic and what's going to happen down the future, or as we go down the future or head off into the future. That would be a concern that I have. It's incredibly arrogant, and because of it is that I like to think I have agency over my own health and how I look after myself, and that's not encouraged. So that will be something that I have a concern about. It's just difficult to talk about it on this platform, but I would like to move on from your concern to what is it that gives you hope for the modern world. I mean, I think you said like 700 years ago. Where am I? 7 years ago, you were more pessimistic, and you seem to have shifted. So, what is it that's giving you hope about us as we go forward?
I think seeing how the conversation is changing around environmental problems, and seeing how awareness of the value of the social sciences, that of which I am and indeed we both are, because I often, as anthropologists, we're often sort of, I think, at this sort of shady edge between the humanities and the social sciences. But and I think psychology is such a kind of fundamental plank of and I've been learning an enormous amount about psychology through my recent kind of professional life. And I think the fact is that now people are finally starting to understand how you cannot ignore the human side of the equation. You can't just assume that people will behave in a simplistically rational way. You have to actually understand the way they really think. And that, for me, gives me an enormous amount of hope for the future, because I think that we will stop, we might avoid some of the worries that we've talked about. I also try and take hope from things like, in my own life, like how things are sort of starting to sort of take shape after the kind of uncertainty of my 20s. I feel like I'm on a bit of a steadier course now. And I think that's, so I feel like I've got things to look forward to. And I think that is a kind of, that's almost like hope in practice, right? It's like, you've got big hope, which is like, oh, I hope we're not going to be hit by an asteroid or something. And then there's like hope in practice, which is like, okay, well, I'm going to have a stake in my future. I'm going to kind of plan for that, gorgeous little cottage, somewhere in the countryside, which I desperately long for, by the way. In fact, if you have any tips about how one can, how did you secure your current house, this wonderful place that I've only heard about and I haven't not yet had the honor of visiting? How did you make that journey there? Love, really.
I met Howard. I lived in Dublin and he lived here, and I was separated 9 months from my first husband. He was widowed 9 months from his first wife. We met, and very quickly, after a month, started going out together, and 7 months later got married. That's the reckless thing I did. Best thing. And so we lived in Dublin and Kilkenny for 4 years because I wasn't ready to give up my life in Dublin. And then I got tired of the double life. We were getting the worst of both rather than the best of both. And so when our son was 2, I said, I'm moving. I'm going to give up my practice in Dublin and moved to Kilkenny. And the best thing I ever did. And it's a magical place. And when I came, it was just a field. The garden was a field. There were a few apple trees.
Wow.
The previous owners had a ride-on moor, and they had, it was all just grass. And now I have a labyrinth. That's the only thing that could be mown, and I've no more room for trees.
Oh, that's
and what I would love to do is visit it for the first time, to experience what people experience when they come to see it for the first. I don't do that. I just don't get that. But it's magic. I'm very drawn to so it's 3 castles is where I live. So I have a Norman tower, and that houses my temples. I have 3 temples there, and it's a ruin. So somebody said their life goal is to say in one of my temples. I saw that earlier on. I can't remember who made the comment, but there's a Norman tower. Actually, it's a pre-Norman tower. The stonework changes and was built on during Norman towers. This house is a tower house. The house was built in 1790 around the tower. So I'm in the tower house part of it now.
Wow.
In this group. And then we don't know, not too sure where the 3rd castle is. So there are a number of ruins nearby that could possibly be the 3rd castle. So I overlook the River Nore. And she's one of the 3 sisters, the 3 sister rivers, the Nore, the Suir, and the Barrow. And Fola, one of the 3 sister goddesses, Eru, Fola, and Banva. So Fola, her spirit is in the River Nore. So it's steeped in history, because across the river is what was known as Moy Aragadrus, the plain of the silver wood. And 10 minutes upriver, there's a rath owned by friends of mine, Rath Bay, Rabay, the rath of the silver of the birch, of the silver birch. And they say Erevan, the first Milesian high king, is buried there.
Oh, wow.
And they say he was married to Tia, an Egyptian priestess, allegedly gives her name to Chower, which is the Irish for Tara. Anyway, it's a nice story. But so this is an ancient place steeped in history, and you can feel the magic.
Absolutely.
That thing about, this is why I had to do this ceremonies here to raise the energy in some way. I'm always iffy about that kind of language, but to build on it. And it has, and it's that interesting thing about how there's a co-creation between you and your landscape. It creates you and you create it, and you have that interdependent symbiotic relationship. And and the land has been really, really gentle with us. We've worked very hard over the years. Somebody says you should give us a virtual tour of your house and garden someday, Catherine. Someday.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe that's an idea. And Ricky says he saw a lovely stone triskel. Yeah, in one of the ruins I have a triskel. Myself and Shaban, my healer friend from Tanzania, he was here that summer, and he really pushed me into holding ceremonies. He said, "You have a key now, use it." And so we built that triskel the year I joined the order. So so it's been lovely to being able to be in a garden that evolved. We didn't have a plan. I remember used to watching, those garden programs with those celebrity gardeners, Jeremy Gavin, and I can't remember. But, where they have a plan and they go, we're going to put this here, we're going to put that there. And I go, we've never done that. It's always been, let's see what evolves. Let's see what evolves. And now, I have hazel trees popping up and on their own. And I planted one aspen tree. Now I have a little mini aspen forest. And then we've lots of blackthorn trees, so that they're quite greedy. I have to watch those. But hawthorn trees, they just pop up. So things just come that I haven't planted. And yet it was hard work for a long time. And now it's like, yes, this takes care of itself. So, because I'm lazy, and I'm not lazy, sorry. I'm just lazy about some things.
One of the main conclusions of my academic research before I sort of moved into government was that one of the biggest things that's changed about the landscape is we've moved using animal energy to using machine energy. And the big benefit animal power, horsepower, manpower has is that humans and animals get tired, which means that they kind of always sort of cut corners. They're not super efficient. They're slightly more relaxed. They get tired. There's bits where they won't go because it's not very, whereas a lawnmower will just go, right? So like that means that there are loads of plants and animals that always relied on the leavings
That's
and
right.
the messy bits that humans and horses and cat and oxen and stuff would leave behind in the landscape. But that modern machinery that we use for landscape management doesn't leave any of that. So you have to actually create it specially, and you have to actually put effort in to actually create those spaces. Which obviously, if you're a company, sometimes it will be that entails a hit to your profit margin normally. So that and I think that has had a really, really significant impact on changing the shape and composition and nature of our landscape. So so you being lazy is the universal condition of mammals everywhere. It's a wonderful thing, which is why your garden has become so vivid and wonderful. I think
That's right. So Jason says, I love letting Mother Nature be the master gardener. And I think there's a lot of the garden is wild. So the only thing that gets mown is my labyrinth, just so that we can see it, so you can walk it. The rest is wild. I mean, I do have a few flower beds, but a lot of it is just leave it. And then you create, I remember when I first came, we were inundated with aphids. They were eating everything. And now, so plants died because we didn't spray anything. Now, if aphids come, then the ladybirds come, or the wasps come, and the ants come. And I've seen them clean plants that have been covered with aphids. And then the next day, the predators and the aphids are all gone. So it's that ability to just allow it. So it's an arc. I don't know if that there was an award-winning gardener. I assume she won in Chelsea. She's Irish, and I can't remember her name. And she has changed completely. And she's talking about, I can't remember what ARC is. It's an acronym about leaving parts of your garden not touched or untouched, so that you have all the biodiversity for insect life, weeds, you name it. Mary Reynolds, thank you, Anne. You're on the ball. And you can Google her, and she speaks about this. And yesterday I started foraging again because the weeds are just beginning to come up. I managed to get some cleavers, and nettles and ground elder to put in my vegetables, So I'm beginning, the next few weeks, to be able to forage stuff. And that's because it's all left alone. So,
and that's wonderful. And I really long to have my own that's a bit like that. I mean, wonderful for now. Like, the plan is definitely to move out to the countryside in the not too distant future, for sure. To ask, have you ever, you probably wouldn't ever have been to Knepp in Sussex.
no.
I think it's quite close to Lewes, actually. It's a big old estates that used to be an intensive dairy farm, I think, and they have really leaned into this sort of.
Oh, they've rewilded it, or they've left it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've sort of left it. I mean, what they've done is because I mean, I think it's often a what's the word? It can be a because you still need to take steps to ensure that things don't so like oftentimes there are things you can do to kind of make it so they're for example changing things about the River Adder that flows through their land in order to but the principle is to restore the ecosystem's sort of functioning, and acts of restorative kindness. I like that.
Thanks, Ricky. That's great to have people paying attention. That's lovely. So that's what the arc is. So, and I think that's very like what you're saying, that and I believe that they're as productive as they're more productive than they.
I don't know, because they still rear livestock, but the stocking levels are much less than they would be on an intensive farm. So they are still productive, but they're not. But they're obviously that's not their main focus. They're not producing bulk. They're producing ecosystems, and it's just those ecosystems produce some food as a byproduct.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same one, but they're actually doing better than they were.
Oh no, you're talking. Sorry, I thought you were still talking about NEP. Sorry. No, you're right. Like there are. I think we're talking about different ones.
Oh, okay, all right. And then it says NEP has released. This is from Marcus Bolognius. NEP has released 70 storks which are breeding. Isn't that wonderful? So we are just almost hitting the 2-hour mark. Yes, we've just done it. So just one or two more questions. Why and when would you fight back?
Fight back. Oh. It's funny. I find it quite difficult to get sort of forceful to someone face to face, and I think that's a really real area of growth for me. I need to get better at standing my ground. I think the times when I do get combative, I suppose, is in issues of sort of in like where we're discussing an issue and like where there's a kind of an intellectual matter at hand. I think that's when I fight back. And that is, it's almost like because it comes very naturally to me. I mean, oh god, that sounds quite, I'm considering my career, like I am very clever, so it comes naturally for me to be like, no, this is the thing, and I just kind of stand in that place, and I almost feel like I'm kind of giving voice to the principle.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's more like people like interacting with, over something like where people's feelings are hurt and stuff, I think my immediate reaction is always to be very conciliatory and to try and find common ground, even when that's not actually the right thing to do, because in some cases you need to actually. So I think I'm getting better though, and I think the thing that really bothers me a lot is injustice. I can't bear things that are unjust, and I think there's a lot of it about. Unfortunately, we live in a world where there's a lot of injustice.
Absolutely. So my final question, which is one, what is your favorite season or your favorite? Sean Hinchliffe has another question. Okay, well, let's do that. Is there anything in Druidry that you find difficult?
Oh, well, I'll answer your first question first because it's a very quick answer, and that's spring. Spring, I love. It's when I was born in late spring, and I love it. And there's no question that being my favorite season. Is there anything in Druidry I find difficult? Lack of permanent purpose-built community spaces I find extremely difficult, because I know that I really benefit from practicing in a group. And I also love having a place that I can go to that is bigger than just my room, because I think like a lot of people my age, like, I spent most of my 20s living in relatively small either student accommodation or rental accommodation where I can't make it into the sort of temple that I would love. I don't have the space, I don't have the permission from my landlord, so and so I think I've always needed places to go outside of my house. But many of the places I've lived, there hasn't been anywhere. Either there haven't been other people, or there hasn't been the space. There hasn't been kind of like dedicated reserved spaces for that. And I think probably that's something that's probably my long-term goal over that next 30 years that I keep talking about, is to start finding ways to actually create more of those kind of sacred spaces, like Crossbones, or other kind of places where it's kind of a given that it's used for spiritual purposes, but it's very inclusive and it's not sort of strictly Christian or whatever. But yeah, that is one thing that I find very difficult about Druidry, is we don't have that yet. If only we did, I'd be happier. My time with Druidry would have a difficulty removed, I think.
Okay, because I don't have that difficulty, so I'm very, very fortunate. But I imagine a lot of people would echo that with you. There are many, maybe the majority of our members are solitary, who haven't experienced that. And It's interesting, given we're now doing the online ceremonies for the first time, that members who have never attended an OBOD ceremony are now getting a chance to do that. I think which is beautiful. So speaking of ceremonies, what is your favorite festival? Now this will be the last question.
Okay.
Which of the Wheel of the Year is your favorite?
Oh, that's much more hard. That's very difficult. I think everyone has their own energetic rhythm, and I think people peak at different festivals, and I think I'm probably strongest at the summer solstice.
Okay.
And I feel, yeah, and I think that probably in terms of the celebrations that I've done community, so White Horse Camps, I think I definitely preferred Lunacer probably. Like I love the fact that the whole community kind of comes together and we all celebrate, and we're out on the land and you can just kind of go and sleep in a hedge and it's perfectly fine because it's middle of summer. I love that kind of energy, but I think that so if it was a toss up between Lunacer and the summer solstice, I would say definitely the summer solstice, because I feel that the energy is fresher then and the land's not as baked dry as it often is in August. So yeah, and I actually, I think one of the things I would really love is if there was and again, this is going back to this idea of there being kind of like purpose-built sacred spaces. In a way, I would love the celebrations at Stonehenge, for example, to be more curated, so that instead of it just being you show up and it's, I mean, like our ceremonies that we do at Stonehenge, right? They're actually curated as a ceremony. Whereas if you go there overnight at the solstice, it's literally you just show up and it's just a big bunch of people sort of milling around. There's floodlit burger vans, a lot of parking, and that's just it. And I'm like, I feel like there's more you could do with that. So that's my from my mouth to the God's ears. Hopefully one day. But yeah, that's probably my favorite, definitely.
Well, Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much. And so what I suggest that we will look at the comments on Facebook, and there may be some that you need to respond to or you'd like to respond to, because people, so Jan Longhurst, thank you so much for an interesting talk and for highlighting something that I'm struggling with but couldn't articulate and now understand. Blessings. This has been a wonderful fireside chat. Many thanks to you both. Lots of things to think about. I find myself reflecting on these conversations all week, so I love and appreciate our time together. Until next week. Absolutely beautiful conversations. So there'll be lots that you might want to respond to. So I'm going to, you don't go away, but I'm just going to turn you off for the moment. Just thank you so much for your attention and your comments. They've been really, really useful, and feeding some of the questions for Jonathan. Just I have some announcements that OBOD we're having our online ceremony for Alban Eiler, or Conach Thanor, as we say in Irish, the spring equinox, on the same platform. It's Facebook and YouTube at 7 p.m. Universal Time this Saturday. And you have a choice afterwards. Dave, the Bard, is doing his his virtual house gig at 8 o'clock. And then Philip has a session with the Synthesis Society, or Synthesis Group. So he's having a ritual and I think discussions, and that's at 8 p.m. afterwards. And then Philip and I will be talking next Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Universal Time with the Catalyst Club. Our host is David Bramwell. So I look forward to seeing you all next week, where I will be talking to another interesting OBOD member. So thanks so much for your attention, and that's great. Listen, blessings to you all, and be safe. Slán go fóill.